Okay, so let's calculate the distance between two more points. We have just calculated the distance between P1 and P2. Now, let me take one more example. We will calculate the distance between points P1 and P3. So the coordinates of P1 are 0.40, 0.53. The coordinates of P3 are 0.35, 0.32. So the distance between P1 and P3, putting the values in Euclidean distance formula, x minus a whole square plus y, plus y minus b, x minus a whole square plus y minus b whole square. This will give me value as 0.22. Okay, so this is the final matrix. After calculating Euclidean distance between all the points, this is the final matrix which we will get. So what does this matrix means? This matrix means that the distance between point P1 and P2 is 0.23. The distance between point P1 and P3 is 0.22. The distance between point P1 and P4 is 0.37, and so on. So as we said, HAC does clustering on the basis of nearest points which are nearest to each other. So all these numbers represent the distance between the points. So what do we mean? That the distance between point P4 and P6 is 0.22. So these numbers represent the distance between different points. So looking at all the values, we can find out that 0.11 is the shortest distance. That means point P3 and point P6 are nearest to each other. I'm comparing all these points. If we plot all these points, then point P3, so looking at this graph, if you look at this graph, I have plotted, as I have shown you this graph earlier also. So these are all 6 points plotted. Looking at these points, point P3 and point P6 are nearest to each other. So they form the first cluster. How do we represent it on the dendrograph? Like this. So this is point 3, this is point 6, and they represent one dendrogram. So let's continue with the problem. So we will be clustering 2 points, P3 and P6. We will form one single cluster of these points. Why? Because these 2 points are nearest to each other. So after forming the cluster, that means now my points would be P1, P2, P3 and P6 are combined, and then I will have P4 and then P5. Right. So now let's try to understand this matrix. So as you can see, I have merged points P3 and P6 together, and rest all points are represented as they were earlier. Now we need to modify this distance matrix again. Why? Because we have formed one cluster of point P3 and P6 together. So the distance between point P1 and P2 is unchanged because we haven't included P1 and P2 in any of the cluster. But the distance between point P1 and this cluster P3 and P6 will be changed. How did I get this new value? Let's come back to this matrix. So have a look here. So the distance between P1 and P3 is 0.22. Distance between point P1 and P6 is 0.23. Why I am taking P3 and P6? Because P3 and P6 have now formed one single cluster. So what are we doing? We are comparing the distance of point P1 with the points in cluster 1. the distance of P1 with P3 is 0.22, while the distance of P1 with P6 is 0.23. So we take the minimum distance value. As we can see, 0.22 is smaller than 0.23. So what we did is, now the distance between P1 and P3, P6, which is now one single cluster, becomes 0.22. Why? Because this is the smallest distance between P1 and this cluster. So now based on this, we will find the distance between P2 and this cluster. So let's again do it. So the distance between P2 and P3 is 0.5. Distance between P2 and P6 is 0.25, which is smaller, 0.15. So the distance between P2 and P3, P6 is 0.15. Right? So similarly, we do with all the other points. Okay, so this is again the new updated matrix. Now look at this matrix again. Which are the 2 points which are nearest to each other? Which are the 2 points which have shortest distance between each other? So looking at all the values, we can easily say that this is the smallest value. This is the minimum distance, which means P2 and P5 are the 2 points which are closest to each other, which are nearest to each other. So they will again form one cluster. P2 and P5 will again be merged to form one cluster. So let's have a look at this matrix. So P3, P6, we made this cluster previously. Now the new cluster which is formed is P2 and P5. Why? Because these were the 2 points which were closest to each other. Now as you can see, I have combined P2 and P5. I have combined P3 and P6. These are the 2 clusters. As we did previously, we will again modify our matrix. Now looking at all the values of these matrix, we will again form clusters. We will again form clusters like this. So the new cluster formed is P2, P5, P3, P6 as one single cluster. After this, again we need to merge points. Which is the smallest distance? This. So what do? We merge P2, P5, P3, P6 with P4. So now look here. This is the new cluster form. Now last point left, which will be again merged. So how do we draw the dendrograph? So first we have merged 2 points. Look here. So we merged 2 points P3 and P6. So P3, P6. Then we merged P2, P5. Then we have merged P2, P5, P3, P6, which results into this. And then we have merged P4 with this. And then finally P1 would be merged. So this was so I repeat. First P3 and P6 were merged, the dendrograph, to form one cluster. Then P2 and P5 were merged. Then P3, P6, P2, P5 were merged to form one cluster. First P3 and P6 were merged to form one cluster. Then P2 and P5 were merged to form a cluster. Then both of these clusters were merged to make one cluster. Then P4 was merged with these points. And then finally P1 was merged to make one big cluster. So this is how HAC works.